Hey everybody, it's Sam here from Sugar Spun Run, and today I'll be showing you how to make these thin, crispy maple leaf cookies. Today's recipe is a little different and pretty original. It was inspired by all of the dead leaves I have around my house that I've been crunching through every time I take my dogs for a walk. I wanted to make a thin, buttery, crispy cookie that's really different from a lot of the softer ones I've shared. I think you guys are going to love this one, so let's get started. The first thing you'll want to do is preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, you'll need a large bowl, and we are going to add 6 tablespoons of softened, unsalted butter to the bowl. We are also going to be adding 3/4 cups of tightly packed light brown sugar. Now, if you don't bake with cups, if you use weights instead, I do include all of the metric measurements for each ingredient in my printable recipe. I'll leave that link in the description. You can head over there if you want to check out the weight measurements. We'll add this in with our butter. And we're also going to add 1½ teaspoons of ground cinnamon. I like to add this in with the wet ingredients rather than with our dry ingredients we'll be mixing up later because I really feel like this helps bring out the cinnamon flavor in the cookies. Now you will want to grab an electric mixer, and you can use a stand mixer if you prefer. I'm just using a hand mixer today. And we're going to beat this together until it's nice and creamy and well combined. So this looks pretty nicely combined. So now we are going to add our maple syrup. You will need 2 tablespoons of maple syrup for this recipe. And if you don't have maple syrup, I have tried this with regular pancake syrup. That works well too. Either way, you're not going to get a very strong maple flavor in these cookies despite adding maple syrup. If you want to amp up that maple flavor a little bit, you can add a teaspoon of maple extract, but that's not required for today's recipe. They're still going to have a very good flavor. It's just not a very strong maple flavor. I'm going to add this in. And I'm also going to add a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. And like I mentioned, if you want to use maple extract, you can cut this down to a ½ teaspoon and then add a teaspoon of maple extract here. Now we'll mix everything together, and as you may have noticed, we're not adding any eggs to this recipe, so this is a great cookie recipe for those of you who can't eat eggs. Now that we have our wet ingredients combined, let's grab a separate bowl, and we are going to add 1 2/3 cup of all-purpose flour to this bowl. We'll add a ½ teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and give everything a good stir. Now we'll bring back our butter mixture that we just prepared, and we're going to gradually add our flour mixture to the butter mixture with our electric mixer on low to medium speed, and we're going to stir until our flour is completely absorbed. Now today's cookie dough is a little different from most of the cookie doughs you may be used to. It's not going to be a very sticky, cohesive dough. When we're done mixing everything together, it actually should still be pretty crumbly. If you've ever made shortbread, you can kind of think of that consistency, except even a little bit sandier than that. What you're looking for is you want the flour to be completely absorbed, and I'll scrape the sides and bottom of my bowl in a second to make sure we're getting everything mixed, but you don't need it to be clinging together completely. But if you do take some of the dough in your hand and press it together, it should hold its shape. Now in this dough, I can still see some of the flour, so I'm going to keep mixing it. I'll show you what it should look like. So this here is actually what you want your cookie dough to look like. If you're using a stand mixer, it's a lot easier to overwork your dough. It's kind of hard to do using a hand mixer, but if your dough clings together more than this, you'll still be able to work with it. Don't panic, but this is the recommended texture when you're making your cookie dough. I'll show you why it works so well in a minute when we go to roll it out. So if you look, if you press it between your fingers, it sticks together, it's firm, and you don't see any white flour in there. So this is the texture that you're looking for, the consistency you want your dough to be. So now what we are going to do is we're going to grab some parchment paper, and we're going to lay out a sheet on our counter, and we're going to pour about 1/4 of our cookie dough onto the middle of our parchment paper. Now we'll take another piece of parchment paper, we're going to lay that over our cookie dough, and just firmly press down on the cookie dough to flatten it a bit. And now you will use a rolling pin to roll this dough out to between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch. You want it to be nice and thin. The thinner the better your cookies are going to taste, and you do want to roll it out evenly so all of your cookies are about the same width. Now the reason I like to use parchment paper rather than doing this directly on my work surface is because the parchment paper, it won't stick to the parchment paper. It's going to make it a lot easier for them to move, and since we're working with such thin cookies, you want to make this as easy for yourself as possible. Plus, it makes cleanup really easy too. So as you're rolling this, your sandy cookie dough is going to come together. Your edges may still be a little bit frayed and they might not cling together like the center does, but that's fine. We'll deal with that later. We're just going to be working with a part of the dough that does cling together. So now we have our nicely rolled out piece of cookie dough. We're going to be working mostly in the center and avoiding those sandy edges because obviously the sandy parts would just fall apart. So stick to the center. We'll deal with the edges later. Now you need your cookie cutter. I like to use this is actually a pie design cutter. It's a maple leaf. You don't have to use this one. I will leave a link in the description if you want to, but any small cookie cutter will work. I recommend using one that's about 2 inches. You don't want to use a really big one because it's going to just cook the outsides and it's going to leave the insides undercooked and they're not going to get crispy. So try to use a smaller cookie cutter. I'm going to use this to cut out as many maple leaves as I can out of my dough. As you can see, this cookie dough holds together really nicely. It's not really super fragile when I'm trying to move it from our parchment paper to our cookie sheet, but a big part of that is because I applied a lot of pressure when I was rolling it with a rolling pin, so make sure you press down very firmly when you're rolling out your dough. Since these cookies are not going to spread at all while they're baking, they don't need too much space. Give them at least a ½ inch apart on the cookie sheet, but they're not going to spread, so you don't have to worry about giving them the standard 2 inches that we usually do with our cookie dough. Once you've gotten as many cuts as possible out of your first roll of cookie dough, I like to group up my scraps and set them aside. What I'm going to do is I'll go through all of my sandy cookie dough first and I'll save all the scraps to the end. So I'll get as many cookies as I can out of that first run from rolling out the sandy dough, and then we'll go back to the scraps, group them together and roll them out and get as many more cookies as we can. I just find that makes it easier rather than trying to work together the dough that's already been worked together and trying to work that into our sandy dough. So these maple leaf cookies are just about ready to bake now, but I do like to top mine with a cinnamon sugar topping. To make this coating, you are just going to need a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, and you will add 1½ teaspoons of ground cinnamon. And then you can just sprinkle your cinnamon generously over your cookies. My husband thinks this makes these taste like the Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal, which is not a bad thing. Now these cookies are ready to bake, so you're going to want to transfer them to your 325° Fahrenheit preheated oven. Now watch them carefully. All ovens tend to run a little bit differently. I keep 2 thermometers in mind to make sure the temperature is right at all times, but if your oven runs a little bit hot, it'll cook these faster. If it runs a little cold, it's going to take longer, so just watch them carefully. You'll want to bake them for 4 minutes, and then you'll rotate them and bake for another 4 minutes. You want them to be a light golden brown, so if they need a little bit more time, you can add a minute or 2 at the end. Now watch them carefully, because if they burn, you're going to have to throw them all out. These do not taste very good burned, so just watch them carefully. Test with your first batch, don't let them burn. And that is how you make these crunchy cinnamon maple leaf cookies. Super easy. These are absolutely addictive. I think you're going to totally love them. Everyone who's tried them cannot stop eating them. If you do try them out, please let me know what you think. I'd really love to hear from you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.